Okay, so today we will take up paper 2 discussion, paper 2 history optional, and we will try to see what kind of question they have asked and what was the trend and what kind of answer we can develop, right? So we will try to develop a format. Fine. So before I start, you can see an analysis, right? An analysis regarding the pattern of the question. You can see from where, which chapter they are asking question, right? So a general idea about this analysis done. And you can also read this analysis, right? You can learn something. Overall, in paper 2, you will realize that in modern India, you have some analytical question, and even in world history you have some analytical question, but difficulty level of modern India you can consider is more, right? तो एक जनरल सेंस आपको ये जाएगा कि मॉडर्न इंडिया को उन्होंने थोड़ा ज़्यादा एप्लीकेशन बेस्ड किया है और वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री से क्वेश्चंस मोर और लेस डायरेक्ट हैं. फाइन, बट ऑलवेज रिमेंबर दैट दे कीप ऑन चेंजिंग दिस काइंड ऑफ ट्रेंड. ऐसा कोई फिक्स नहीं होता कि हमेशा मॉडर्न इंडिया टफ पूछा जाएगा या वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री आसान पूछा जाएगा या एंशियंट इंडिया टफ पूछा जाएगा. जनरली वो चेंज करते रहते हैं, लेकिन अगर आपने ठीक से तैयारी किया हुआ है तो आपको लिखने के लिए प्रश्न मिल जाएंगे, राइट? डन. सो मॉडर्न इंडिया इज जनरली कंसीडर्ड एज, राइट, जनरली राइट, कंसीडर्ड एज डिफिकल्ट. सो application based question, is that done? So now you can read this analysis, right, whenever you are getting time. Now coming to the discussion, right, generally the kind of question they have asked, you can see how they are, right, framing the question also. If you can see, you have, right, you have two sections, section A and section B. I hope you all know section A and section B. And in section A, question number 1 you have to attempt, right? And they are asking 5 question, 10 marks each. आपको उसको 150 वर्ड में लिखना होता है. सो क्वेश्चन नंबर 1 इज रियली चैलेंजिंग, राइट? जो एक दो बार लिख चुके हैं मेन एग्जामिनेशन वो जानते हैं कि क्वेश्चन नंबर 1 जो होता है सो सबसे चैलेंजिंग क्वेश्चन होता है, क्योंकि हमें समझना होता है. जनरली वो स्टेटमेंट बेस्ड होता है, राइट? तो क्वेश्चन नंबर 1 देख के थोड़ा सा डर लगता है, राइट? आपको लगेगा कि राइट, ये थोड़ा गंभीर मामला है. सो क्वेश्चन नंबर 1 इज चैलेंजिंग, राइट? देन after question number 1 you have to write at least one, so that rest you can write, right, from section B. So you have section 1 and right, you have section B also. So section 1 is related to modern India and section B is related to world history. So you have section B also, and in section B also you have first question as, right, compulsory question. Now starting with the first question, is that fine? First question, see, first question, as I told you, you have 10 marks question, 150 word each, right? 150 word each, 10 marks question. So first challenge in this kind of question is, to understand these question, right? आप ये नहीं समझना है कि इसमें कोई रेडीमेड पॉइंट्स होगा आपके पास और आप सीधे उसको लिख देंगे. ये स्टेटमेंट बेस्ड क्वेश्चंस होते हैं, आपको समझना होता है इनको, इनके सारे वर्ड्स को आपको समझना होता है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, जस्ट देखते हैं इसको. कॉलोनियलिज्म हैड ए ट्विस्टेड लॉजिक ऑफ इट्स ओन, राइट? Colonialism had a twisted logic of its own for commercialization. Twisted logic of its own for commercialization. Have you heard about commercialization? We generally prepare commercialization of agriculture. Yes, we generally prepare commercialization of agriculture, but they are not writing commercialization of agriculture. ये आपने ध्यान दिया? They are not writing commercialization of agriculture. They are generally writing what? Commercialization. So you have to suggest how railways, right? How in trade practices, commercialization. So first statement is colonialism had a twisted logic of its own for commercialization, right? It emerges on analysis to have been often an artificial and forced process, right? Artificial and forced process. Fine. Now try to understand this question. If you understand this, that colonialism had a twisted logic of its own for commercialization. जरा इस बात को पहले समझते हैं आसानी से कि हर एक चीज के लिए कॉलोनियलिज्म अपना एक अलग ही लॉजिक देता है. Generally, when you say commercialization or commercialization of agriculture, it is generally considered as a positive thing. Generally, it is considered as a positive development if it is natural. अगर ये natural है, अगर ये forced नहीं है, if it is with technological development, commercialization is considered as a positive development. But in the British period, this commercialization of agriculture mainly became what? It became a negative thing. It was an exploitative thing. There was a reaction against it. I hope you are getting my point. Commercialization of agriculture हो या commercialization in general, ये मानी जाती है कि ये अच्छी बात होगी. लेकिन कॉलोनियलिज्म के अनुसार ये एक नई बात थी, है ना. कॉलोनियलिज्म ने इसका एक लॉजिक दिया कि इससे कैपिटलिज्म आएगा, इससे डेवलपमेंट आएगा, इससे हैप्पीनेस आएगा. लेकिन हुआ क्या? तो ये जो ट्विस्टेड लॉजिक है, क्या लॉजिक था उसका? उनके फेवर में. ट्विस्टेड लॉजिक मतलब उनके फेवर में, मास्टर कंट्री के फेवर में लॉजिक. तो कमर्शलाइजेशन कोई नई बात नहीं थी. कमर्शलाइजेशन तो आपने ब्रिटिश पीरियड से पहले भी देखा था. लेकिन जो कॉलोनियल पीरियड में कमर्शलाइजेशन ऑफ एग्रीकल्चर था, इट हैड इट्स negative impact. Why negative impact? Because it was a forced process. It was not natural, artificial. It was artificial. It was a forced process. जबरदस्ती ऐसी लैंड रेवेन्यू पॉलिसी उन्होंने की थी कि पेजेंट को कमर्शलाइजेशन करना पड़ा, उनसे जबरदस्ती करवाया गया, राइट. उनके एग्रीकल्चर को बाहर के मार्केट से जोड़ दिया गया. एग्रीकल्चर तो हमेशा एक जुआ होता है मॉनसून के कारण. अब एक नया प्रॉब्लम आ गया. अगर बाहर कोई फ्लक्चुएशन हो रहा है तो कौन सफर करेगा? पेजेंट सफर करेगा. तो कमर्शलाइजेशन वैसे तो अच्छी बात है, लेकिन कॉलोनियलिज्म में, कॉलोनियल पीरियड में, चूंकि ये फोर्स प्रोसेस था, चूंकि ये आर्टिफिशियल प्रोसेस था, तो ये नेगेटिव चीज हो गया. और साथ में जब अकाल आया, फेमीन आई, लोग मरने लगे, फूड क्रॉप नहीं थी, खाने के लिए कुछ नहीं था, तो स्थिति और गंभीर हो गई. आई होप यू आर गेटिंग माई पॉइंट. सो कमर्शलाइजेशन ऑफ एग्रीकल्चर का क्या इंपैक्ट हुआ? Right, you have to write. So how you will develop this question? It's a 10 marks question. You have to write brief, right? And you have to mention that colonialism, what is colonialism? You have to mention what was the twisted logic right? And then you have to mention that how it was an artificial and forced process. Fine. So this way you can develop this question, right? If you understand it, you can write something about it. You can use these points also, right? You can use this point. Fine. You can use that commercialization was not completely new to India, but the form that it took under early British rule differed in several important ways. So you have to explain how it differed in several important ways. Explain, you have to explain this, right? It was a forced process, it was, right, artificial process, and it was done by, you can say, by a trading company whose headquarters was in England, and it was mainly concerned with the acquiring Indian goods for sale in Europe. So Indian market, right, it was not for their profit, it was for, you can say, the colonial profit. And what was the result of it? Far reaching impact. It had far reaching impact. Is that fine? Now coming to the next question. Next question is also, these are 10 marks question, simple, right? Not simple, I would not say simple, but a statement would be there and you have to analyze these statement. You have to write your views, right? You have to examine them, right? So next question is, after 1857, the peasant emerged as the main force in agrarian movement, right? So before 1857 and after 1857, right, till Gandhian phase, and then you will see in the Gandhian phase, right, after Gandhi, right? So you have different phases of peasant movement, different phases of peasant movement, right? So before 1857, the peasant, they were not the, you can say, main force in agrarian movement. You must be knowing the Dhing, right, Rangpur Dhing. You have some example before 1857 also in your syllabus. But in general, before 1857, they were not the force to reckon with. They were the part of any popular movement, है ना? तो peasant किसी popular movement के part हुआ करते थे, except some like Rangpur Dhing I said. But after 1857, you will see that now they had a better sense. You have more exploitation. You have more exploitation of peasant. Then they have, you can say, more awareness also, more awareness, role of intelligentsia. And therefore, after 1857, you will see there was revolt like Indigo revolt. You have revolt example like Pavana. You have Deccan riots. Then you have some important peasant movement in Awadh, then in some other areas. So after 1857, the peasant emerged as the main force, right? Why? Because they were more, right, aware, because they were more exploited, right? So therefore, they, right, started, right, reacting against the forces. They also had some limitation. They had, you can say, no clear-cut idea about colonialism in this period. They had clear-cut idea about colonialism after this period, but they were more aware, and intelligentsia also played important role in this awareness, right, in this awareness. Fine. So you can use this, that peasant represent a vast mass of landless agricultural laborers. And after 1857, what was the reason for their spontaneous peasant uprising in different parts of the country? Because of excessive rent, because of high-handedness of jamindars. And you can also give example of Indigo rebellion, Pavana movement, and Deccan riots. So this way you can handle this question also. Now coming to next question. See, this next question is related to what? Awakened political consciousness of Indian masses, bound with dishonorable and cowardly insults of the British, led to the movement of non-cooperation. So actually, you have to write about causes of non-cooperation movement. Yes or no? You have to actually write about the causes of non-cooperation movement. Causes of non-cooperation movement. Right? You have to write causes of non-cooperation movement. Right? Fine. And in causes of non-cooperation movement, why non-cooperation movement? They have mentioned because awakened political consciousness, awakened political consciousness, then you have dishonorable and cowardly insults of the British. Dishonorable and cowardly insults. Right? So, why non-cooperation movement? Number one reason, why non-cooperation movement? Because of awakened political consciousness, and second, dishonorable and cowardly insult. How? Are you getting this? How awakened political consciousness? Awakened political consciousness because there was no Swaraj issue. Swaraj issue, limitation of 1919 Act, diarchy, right? Awakened political consciousness. Why? Because of what is called Khilafat issue. Khilafat issue. Are you getting it? Awakened political consciousness. And then how dishonorable and cowardly insults. Can you think about it? What was the insult? What was the insult? Cowardly insult of the British. Suppose Rowlatt Act. Rowlatt Act. They can arrest you without trial. Violation of natural justice. Suppose Jallianwala Bagh massacre. Jallianwala Bagh massacre. Yes or no? So Jallianwala Bagh massacre. So because of that insult, तो असहयोग आंदोलन नॉन कॉपरेशन मूवमेंट को किसने जन्म दिया? तो हमें एक्चुअली एक्सप्लेन करना है कि क्या ये सही बात है कि अवेकेंड पॉलिटिकल कॉन्शसनेस एंड डिसऑनरेबल एंड कवार्डली इंसल्ट led to the non-cooperation movement. So you generally it is said that yes, it is correct that awakened political consciousness and dishonorable and cowardly insult. And then we can also add that the economic condition, economic difficulties, right? That was also one of the reason, and that led to non-cooperation movement. So why non-cooperation movement? You all know why non-cooperation movement. Non-cooperation movement because of Khilafat wrong, non-cooperation movement because of Punjab wrong, non-cooperation movement because of Swaraj wrong, non-cooperation movement because of economic wrong. तो इन सारे कारणों की वजह से non-cooperation movement हुआ था. This you have to elaborate, right? So you have to suggest that what all happened and how it led to non-cooperation movement. तो जो लिखा हुआ है इसके अलावा कुछ इकोनॉमिक डायमेंशन भी है that also led to non-cooperation movement. Is that fine? Now next again related to Gandhi. When Gandhi ji launched the civil disobedience movement, he was desperately in search of an effective formula. Desperately in search of an effective formula. when Gandhiji launched the civil disobedience movement. Try to understand the background when Gandhiji launched the civil disobedience movement. Actually, you have to write the background of civil disobedience movement. Background of civil disobedience movement. Right. So what is the background of civil disobedience movement? You have to write that, see, failure of Simon Commission, failure of Simon Commission. Then you will see, right, Lahore resolution, Lahore Purna Swaraj resolution, Purna Swaraj resolution, yes or no, 1929, and then decision to start a movement, then Gandhiji's 11-point demand, Gandhiji's 11-point demand, 11-point demand. It included demand of peasant, demand of working class, middle class, right? So 11-point demand. And then when there was, you can say, there was no response, he had no option, and then what started? Salt, breaking the salt law, Dandi March. So finally you have Dandi March and the civil disobedience movement started. Dandi March and civil disobedience movement started. So civil disobedience movement started, and he was desperately in search of an effective formula. Why desperately? Why desperately? Because you have to write why desperately. Because discontent of different sections of the society, the demand of Purna Swaraj represent what? Radicalization of politics, youth, socialist influence, peasant, workers, capitalist, right? You will see that there was a desperation, and Gandhiji was also seeking a formula, and he got a formula in form of breaking the salt law. So you have to explain the background, and in that background you have to explain this, that Gandhiji launched civil disobedience movement because, right, he got a formula, and that formula was really helpful. Fine. So this way you can handle this question also. Now coming to, you can say, next question. If abdication of British responsibility at the time of transfer of power was callous, the speed with which it was done made it worse. See, after cabinet mission plan, they decided that now unity is the only option. But direct action day, communal rights, and then they went for that decision that they have to leave, right? So they decided for transfer of power. And what was the Attlee's, right, opinion, that they would be leaving in, right, June 1948. Fine. But the speed, are getting it? So the idea is the way they passed the bill, 3rd June plan was there, the way they passed the bill, right, this actually made the situation worse. So if abdication of British responsibility at the time of transfer power was callous, because they were not taking the responsibility, when they were saying that they will be leaving without, you can say, handling all the problem, so their approach was callous, and the real issue was the speed with which it was done. Speed, because the bill was passed, right, so quickly. And what was the result of this? What was the result of this kind of speed? What was the result of this kind of speed? Result of this kind of speed was communal right, right? What was the result of this kind of speed? Result of this kind of speed was, right, communal right, integration of state. The problem was what? What was the problem? Communal rights began. Communal rights, right? You will see the challenges of integration of state, the fear of balkanization of state, fear of balkanization, fear of balkanization, right? Fear of balkanization. Then even they say that right, our problem like the Kashmir issue and all is also because of this kind of speed, this kind of callous attitude. They could not solve the problem. So if abdication of British responsibility at the time of transfer of power was callous, because they were not ready to share the responsibility. I hope you have the idea of Plan Balkan. I hope you have the idea of breakdown plan. But finally, because of Menon, because of Vallabhbhai Patel, there was 3rd June plan. But they were actually in a hurry. And the speed made the situation worse. And you have to write what kind of problem, right, emerged because of this kind of speed. So communal right, fear of balkanization, integration of state became challenging. Then some, you can say the Kashmir issue and all this you can relate with this kind of callous approach of British. They could not settle the boundary issue. They were very quick in handling all this thing, right? So negotiation was there. Mountbatten came for negotiation, but he was, right, frustrated because of they had many opinions. They were not ready to take this responsibility. They wanted to leave, and that made the situation very difficult. So this you have to write. Now next question, right, these are the 5 question, compulsory question. Then we are coming to, right, next question, and this is 20 marks question. The Carnatic War, the Anglo-Mysore War and the Anglo-Maratha War had virtually eliminated the French from the contest of supremacy in South India, right? So in this question you have to write how Carnatic Wars eliminated the French, right? So you have 3 Carnatic War, and finally you have Treaty of Paris. Yes, Treaty of Paris. So Carnatic War, how it was the end of the political ambition of the French. This you have to elaborate. Fine. It should be in detail, the 3 Carnatic War, how they handled Dupleix, how Dupleix was recalled, and then how finally they defeated French, and Treaty of Paris was there. So 3 Carnatic War, how it eliminated the French, it should be elaborated. Then in Anglo-Mysore War, the real threat for British was what? Tipu factor. Anglo-Mysore War, the real threat was what? Tipu factor. You all know that Tipu had relation with France. Tipu maintained good relation with France. So winning or strengthening the condition of Tipu or consolidating the position of Tipu would be what? Strengthening French. So defeating Tipu was a good, you can say, was a great move. So when they defeated Tipu in 1799, Tipu died. So that was a great relief for the British. They eliminated the French from the contest of supremacy. And then you also have to write separately Anglo-Maratha War. Anglo-Maratha War. So in general, we generally don't, remember that how Anglo-Maratha war was also related to French connection. Actually, if you remember, Nana Fadnavis was also in contact with the French, right? So if you remember that at the time of Treaty of Surat and Treaty of Purandar, so there was some French issue involved. So Anglo, you can say Maratha war, and the defeating Maratha was also elimination of the French from the contest of supremacy. So you have to write first in detail Carnatic war, then you have to write in brief Anglo-Mysore war, Tipu factor, and Anglo-Maratha war. So this way you have to discuss how these three war, right, eliminated the French from the contest of supremacy in South India. So part 1 Carnatic war, then part 2 Anglo-Mysore war, and then part 3 Anglo-Maratha war. So it's a 20 marks question. You have to, right, elaborate. Done. Now coming to next question. See, this question, right, you can feel that it is slightly complicated, but while introducing the Indian Council Bill of 1861, the British thought that the only government suitable for India is despotism controlled from whom? Right, comment. See, try to understand the background of 1861. What is the background? Background is 1857 revolt. Background is 1857 revolt. And after the 1857 revolt, when they started analyzing the causes of 1857 revolt, they found what? That there is a missing link between ruler and the ruled. Right, ruler and the ruled. So therefore, after 1861, they wanted to involve Indian. Are you getting it? They wanted to involve Indians. You are getting this or not? They wanted to involve India. And in 1861, they actually involved some what is called natives of high rank. Right? So in 1861, they wanted to involve Indian. They started involving some natives of high rank. High rank. Right? You will see legislative council, additional members, portfolio system, and they started involving natives of high rank. So actually they wanted to involve Indian. This idea you have to represent. This idea. So idea now was giving representation to the Indians. This idea was mooted after 1857 revolt. So they wanted to involve Indian because they realized that without involving Indians, there would be a gap. There would be a gap between rulers and the ruled. And therefore, they started involving them. But don't think that, right, now there was Indian participation, but despotism continued. Of course, they involved Indians, they started involving Indians. Of course, there was some decentralization, no doubt about it. But idea is that their control continued, despotism continued, and this you can notice when you say that they had the power to issue ordinance making power. And in ordinance making power, you will see that how they started making ordinance without the concurrence of the legislative council, So despotism, yes, but despotism controlled from whom? Now that was the formula. And don't think that their intention was responsible government. They wanted to continue despotism, but despotism controlled, right, from the home. And why this change of policy? I told you, because they realized this need. And even you will see that Sir Charles Wood also, while introducing the bill, made it clear that the Majesty's government had no intention to introduce a representative law-making body in the normal sense of the word. They had no intention of lawmaking body. So when you say legislative council and all, which developed after that, so their real intention was different. They had some hidden agenda. They wanted to involve Indian, but they were not ready to give Indian the real representation, real responsible government, right? So that was the object of 1861 Act, right? Done. Now, next question, if you can see, that the root of the whole question behind the indigo revolt is the struggle to make the Raiyat grow into indigo plants without paying them the price of it. Right. So this question is simple about indigo revolt. Indigo revolt. Right. And what was the reason for indigo revolt? The reason for indigo revolt was that under compulsion they had to cultivate indigo, because indigo that time was in need, right? So it was also related to, right, the commercialization factor, right? So they actually compelled them to produce indigo, right? How they compelled them to produce indigo, right? You can see that European planters exploited the local peasant. They forced the peasant to take advance sum and enter into fraudulent contracts. They used lathials, they used legal manipulations, they intimidated them through kidnapping, through flogging, through the attack on their women and children, by seizing their cattle, by burning and demolishing of houses and destruction of their crops. So they were forcing them to cultivate. Right? And they were led by Digambar Biswas and Vishnu Biswas. And in 1859, this reaction was there, this explosion was there. So indigo revolt was actually a very good example of force, forcing the peasant to produce at any cost without paying the price of it, right? But indigo commission was constituted. So one of the, you can say, result of this indigo, right, revolt was constitution of that commission. So indigo revolt, as they have asked, right, that the root of the question behind this was the struggle to make the Raiyat grow indigo without paying them the price of it, right? So they were compelling them to, you can say, produce indigo. So you have to highlight this. Now, next is, do you agree that the decline of traditional Indian artisan production was a fact, sad but inevitable? See, this issue, it's a fact, but sad but inevitable. So this view is a Western view. Actually, right, one of the economic impact of British rule was what we call deindustrialization. And there is a debate among historians regarding the deindustrialization. There are two views. One view is that deindustrialization is not a fact, right? It's a myth. It's a myth. And it is inevitable. Right? It is normally, right, whenever there is a development of modern industry, so there was destruction of handicraft, what is called deindustrialization. So one view is that it's a myth. Deindustrialization is a myth. So there is a debate. You have to highlight. There is a debate. And according to Maurice de Maurice, Thorner, it's a myth. It is inevitable. But according to our nationalist historian, deindustrialization, right, was actually instrumental in destruction of our handicraft, and it never recovered. We are still facing this problem, right? So according to nationalist historian, deindustrialization is a reality, and it was an exploitative policy. And right, British deliberately did this through their policies, deliberately did this after 1813. So nationalist historian, they suggested that their free trade policy, their deliberate policy, actually was instrumental in destruction of traditional industry. So in this question you have to highlight that debate, right? So you can use this, that during the 19th century, how India's economy witnessed a strange phenomena, right? A strange phenomena. While the Western countries were experiencing industrialization, India suffered a period of industrial decline, and this is called deindustrialization. India's traditional handicraft industry decayed beyond recovery. But Western scholars like Morris de Morris and Thorner, they considered it as what? That it's a myth. Right? They considered it as a myth. It was a worldwide phenomena. ये natural बात है, जहाँ कहीं भी industrial development होता है तो वहाँ पर handicraft industry का decline होता है. तो उनके अनुसार ये इनइविटेबल चीज थी, वर्ल्ड वाइड फिनोमेना था, नेचुरल बात थी, ये कोई कोई एक्सप्लॉयटेटिव डिलिबरेट पॉलिसी नहीं थी. तो ये हुआ जरूर, लेकिन ये होता है. दैट वाज द आइडिया ऑफ द वेस्टर्न स्कॉलर. नेशनलिस्ट हिस्टोरियन के बारे में हमें बताना है कि हाउ दे सेड दैट, हाउ इट वाज ए रियलिटी, हाउ इट डिस्टर्ब्ड आवर इकोनॉमी, हाउ इट डिस्टर्ब आवर, यू कैन से, रूरल इकोनॉमी. फाइन. Now, next question. The historical significance of tribal and peasant uprising in India lies in that they established a strong and valuable tradition of resistance to British rule. Historical significance of tribal and peasant uprising in India. See, this term is tradition of resistance. Tradition of resistance. Right. So Bipin Chandra also used this tradition of resistance. We generally understand that, that India reacted, right, violently in 1857. But before 1857 also, there was a valuable tradition of resistance. You have, right, civil rebellion, you have, right, you have tribal rebellion, you have tribal revolt, you have peasant revolt, you have some religious sect also, you have sannyasi, you have pagalpanthi revolt. So all this revolt, suppose you have paikas, so all these revolt, they actually established what is called tradition of resistance. This term is there. You have to give example. Right? And they always resisted the British policy. They always resisted the British policy. You have to give example. Right? So, चाहे वो ट्राइबल हो या पेजेंट हो या revolt हो, the significance of them was that they kept on telling the British government that we are not happy with this British rule. They never accepted the British interference. They never accepted the British economic model. They never accepted the British, cultural model, the activities of the Christian missionaries. So through example, you have to give, you can say, explain that how they established the tradition of resistance. And this tradition of resistance is considered as what is called prehistory of Indian nationalism. है ना, इसको कहा जाता है प्री हिस्ट्री ऑफ इंडियन नेशनलिज्म. अगर ये नहीं होता तो नेशनलिज्म इतनी जल्दी परकोलेट नहीं होता, इतने नीचे तक परकोलेट नहीं होता. तो इन्होंने बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट रोल प्ले किया. राइट. सो यू हैव टू गिव एग्जाम्पल एंड यू हैव टू एक्सप्लेन इट. फाइन. राइट. नाउ द नेक्स्ट. To accomplish the aims of education, political propaganda and formation as well as propagation of nationalist ideology, the press became the chief instrument. Now, in this question, you have to explain a role of press. role of press. You have to example that how role of press played important role in education, how press played important role in propagation of nationalist ideology, propagation of political propaganda, how they played important role in propagation of nationalist ideology, राइट। तो हमें बताना है कि प्रेस ने कैसे एजुकेशन को प्रमोट किया, प्रेस कैसे इंस्ट्रूमेंट बना पॉलिटिकल प्रोपेगेंडा का, कैसे इंस्ट्रूमेंट बना फॉर्मेशन एंड प्रोपेगेशन ऑफ नेशनलिस्ट आइडियोलॉजी, कैसे प्रेस ने इंपॉर्टेंट रोल प्ले किया। तो इसको कैसे लिखेंगे? प्रेस ने तो रोल प्ले किया, नो डाउट अबाउट इट। प्रेस ने रोल प्ले किया एजुकेट करने में, पॉलिटिकल प्रोपेगेंडा के लिए, नेशनलिज्म को प्रमोट करने के लिए, नेशनल आइडियोलॉजी को प्रमोट करने के लिए। हम क्या करेंगे? वी विल यूज द एग्जाम्पल, सपोज एग्जाम्पल ऑफ राइट संवाद कौमुदी, एग्जाम्पल ऑफ मिरातुल अखबार, एग्जाम्पल ऑफ सपोज युगांतर, सपोज एग्जाम्पल ऑफ केसरी, राइट, suppose example of Sanjeevani, right, which talked about boycott, right. So suppose example of right Harijan, suppose example of Amrit Bazar Patrika. Are you getting this? So we will take all these example and we will mention that how Surendranath Banerjee used it, how Tilak used it, how Gandhi used it. तो हम अलग अलग एग्जाम्पल लेके प्रेस के रोल को दिखाएंगे अलग अलग तरीके से कि प्रेस ने क्या क्या रोल प्ले किया। दे प्लेड वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट रोल इन राइज ऑफ नेशनलिज्म, एराउजल ऑफ नेशनलिज्म, राइट। सो दे बिकेम द चीफ इंस्ट्रूमेंट, फाइन, एंड देयरफॉर दे वांटेड टू बैन प्रेस, यू नो, दे ऑलवेज वांटेड टू रेगुलेट द फ्रीडम ऑफ प्रेस। हमेशा वो रेगुलेट करते थे। सपोज वर्नाकुलर प्रेस एक्ट, गैगिंग एक्ट, राइट। सो प्रेस ने इंपॉर्टेंट रोल प्ले किया, मोबिलाइज किया लोगों को, एजुकेट किया लोगों को, प्रोपोगेट किया नेशनलिज्म को, और लोगों को फाइनली ट्रेन किया, राइट, इन द नेशनल मूवमेंट। तो हम एग्जाम्पल लेंगे और उस एग्जाम्पल के थ्रू हम इसको बताएंगे, फाइन। नाउ नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन इज द यूनिवर्सलिस्ट पर्सपेक्टिव ऑफ सोशियो रिलीजियस रिफॉर्म मूवमेंट was not a purely philosophical concern. It strongly influenced the political and social outlook of the time. See, this question is related to socio-religious reform movement. Socio-religious reform movement of 19th century. And you must be knowing that this socio-religious reform movement had many ideological bases. था ना, socio-religious reform movement का बहुत सारा ideological basis था, जैसे rationalism, humanism, universalism, democracy, all this, right, they were the ideological basis of socio-religious reform movement. So one of the ideological basis of the social religious reform movement was their universalistic perspective. Universalistic perspective. Universalistic perspective. And Raja Ram Mohan Roy also considered Brahm Samaj as universal church, right? राजा राम मोहन रॉय का भी अप्रोच यूनिवर्सलिस्टिक था। सर सैयद अहमद खां ऑल्सो टॉक्ड अबाउट यूनिवर्सलिस्टिक अप्रोच। हम उसको एग्जाम्पल देंगे। एंड देन यू हैव टू राइट दैट हाउ दिस यूनिवर्सलिस्टिक पर्सपेक्टिव इन्फ्लुएंस्ड पॉलिटी एंड सोसाइटी, पॉलिटी एंड सोशल आउटलुक ऑफ द टाइम, पॉलिटिकल एंड सोशल आउटलुक ऑफ द टाइम। ये जो यूनिवर्सलिस्टिक पर्सपेक्टिव था जो राजा राम मोहन रॉय या सर सैयद अहमद खां बात करते हैं, उससे कैसे पॉलिटिकल और सोशल आउटलुक में फर्क पड़ा। एजुकेशन प्रमोट हुआ, दे राइट टॉक्ड अबाउट रेजिंग द स्टेटस ऑफ वीमेन, they talked about nationalism. Suppose one example is Dada Bhai Naroji, he was also a reformer but he participated in national movement, तो फर्क तो पड़ा, इसने प्रभावित किया पॉलिटिकल और सोशल आउटलुक को। तो हम लोग बताएंगे कि सोशल रिलीजियस रिफॉर्म मूवमेंट क्या था, हम लोग बताएंगे कि इसके कई आइडियोलॉजिकल बेसिस थे। एक आइडियोलॉजिकल बेसिस था यूनिवर्सलिस्टिक पर्सपेक्टिव, देन वी विल से दैट हाउ राजा राम मोहन रॉय एंड right, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, they also appreciated this universalism of social religious reform movement, and then how it influenced the polity and social outlook of the time. So if you can see, right, you can use this point that though the reformers tried to reform their religion, there was a universalistic aspect of their religious perspective. You can talk about Raja Ram Mohan Roy, you can talk about Raja Ram Mohan Roy, you can talk about Syed Ahmad Khan. Raja Ram Mohan Roy considered different religion as national embodiment of universal theism. He defended the basic and universal principle of all religion. Syed Ahmad Khan also said that all prophets had the same deen and every country and nation had different prophets, right? And how this approach change the, or you can say influence the political and social outlook, right? So it gave rise to nationalism. Of course there was some limitation. ऐसा नहीं है कि सती बंद हो गई, ऐसा नहीं है कि विडो रिमैरिज होना शुरू हो गया, ऐसा नहीं है। दे हैड लिमिटेशन, वी हैव सम केस स्टडी ऑल्सो। लेकिन एजुकेशन तो बढ़ा, पॉलिटिकल और राइट सोशल और रिलीजियस यूनिटी थोड़ी सी ज़्यादा हुई जरूर है ना, कुछ पॉजिटिव चीज़ें तो हुई, बट यस देयर वाज सम लिमिटेशन, राइट। तो इन्फ्लुएंस किया इसको, राइट, पॉलिटिकल और सोशल आउटलुक को इसने इन्फ्लुएंस किया, दिस यू कैन रिमेंबर, राइट। नाउ द नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन, now the Congress Socialist Party agenda was not to cut off from the Congress but intended to give the Congress and the national movement a socialist direction, right? See, हमारे सिलेबस में एक टॉपिक है राइज ऑफ लेफ्ट, एंड देन देयर वाज राइज ऑफ लेफ्ट विद इन कांग्रेस, देयर वाज राइज ऑफ लेफ्ट within Congress, right? So 1920s में लेफ्ट का राइज हुआ और 1930s में राइज ऑफ लेफ्ट विद इन कांग्रेस, एंड फाइनली इन 1934 कांग्रेस सोशलिस्ट पार्टी वाज फॉर्म्ड, कांग्रेस सोशलिस्ट पार्टी वाज फॉर्म्ड। Yes, Acharya Narendra Dev, Jayaprakash Narayan, Minnu Masani, right? So Congress Socialist Party was formed, right? What was the object of this Congress Socialist Party? Object of this Congress Socialist Party was, right, object of this Congress Socialist Party was to transform Congress, to transform Congress, मतलब ideologically and organizationally, right, ideologically and organizationally. So how transforming the Congress ideologically transforming the Congress, because they started talking about social and economic independence. And how organizationally? Because they started involving peasant and workers in the Congress. So finally what they wanted, वो चाहते थे कि कांग्रेस को और स्ट्रेंथन कर दें, मजबूत कर दें, राइट, और मजबूत कर दे कांग्रेस को। कैसे? इसको और सोशलिस्ट बना के, सोशलिस्टिक अप्रोच करके इसको और कांग्रेस बना दे और मजबूत बना दे। और उसका असर दिखा, उसका असर कांग्रेस के बाद में, इसके बाद जितने सेशंस हुए, चाहे फैजपुर हो या कोई और, उस पर दिखा। तो इनका ऑब्जेक्ट कांग्रेस को कमजोर करना नहीं था, इनका ऑब्जेक्ट था कि कांग्रेस को आइडियोलॉजिकली और ऑर्गेनाइजेशनली और मजबूत कर दे, इसका जो आधार है उसको और बढ़ा दे, उसके बेस को और बढ़ा दे। फाइन। सो Congress Socialist Party agenda was not to cut off from the Congress but intended to give the Congress and national movement a socialist direction. The idea was to appreciate the socio-economic approach, peasant की डिमांड, वर्कर की डिमांड को इन्वॉल्व करना, राइट, ब्रॉड बेस करना कांग्रेस को. सो देयर इंटेंशन वाज नॉट टू weaken them, their intention was to make them strong. कांग्रेस के अंदर रह के कांग्रेस को स्ट्रॉन्ग करना. आई होप यू आर गेटिंग दिस. कांग्रेस सोशलिस्ट पार्टी एक इंपॉर्टेंट राइट डायमेंशन है हमारे राइज ऑफ लेफ्ट का. विद इन द कांग्रेस, कांग्रेस सोशलिस्ट पार्टी ने लेफ्ट के आइडियोलॉजी को अप्रिशिएट किया. राइट, यू कैन यूज दिस पॉइंट फॉर योर आंसर. You can use this, that the leader of the Congress Socialist Party had a well thought out strategy behind the idea of organizing a left oriented separate party yet keeping it inside the fold of the Congress, right? And while the separate existence of the party enabled them to have greater ideological maneuverability, the association with the Congress enabled them to derive strength from the latter, right? Particularly the mass appeal of Gandhi. What they tried to achieve was to transform the Congress into a radical organization and ultimately persuade it to accept a socialist program and even a socialist leadership. So they wanted to make Congress strong. So they wanted to make Congress more strong, right? So they, in this manner, they wanted to involve many people. Fine. So Congress Socialist Party when established 1934. Fine. Done. तो मैंने बताया कि लेफ्ट का इमरजेंस 1920s में होना शुरू हो गया था और कांग्रेस के अंदर सोशलिस्ट पार्टी बनी 1930s में. इसका असर क्या हुआ? इसका असर आप देखेंगे. इसका असर पेजेंट और वर्कर के डिमांड, इकोनॉमिक डिमांड को कांग्रेस के आइडियोलॉजी में, कांग्रेस के राइट रोड मैप में बिल्कुल दिखता है उसके बाद. ठीक. नाउ नेक्स्ट इज, हाउ डिड द फैक्शनलाइज्ड दलित लीडरशिप इन हैदराबाद अंडरगो ए पीरियड ऑफ इंटेंस राइट रीऑर्गेनाइजेशन राइट between 1948 and 1953. Now they have the habit of asking some question like this also. Honestly speaking, this kind of question is very difficult to handle. And from post independence, generally आप देखेंगे जो कोई हिस्ट्री ऑप्शनल को तैयार करते हैं, ये बात उनको ध्यान में रखना चाहिए कि जनरली वो करंट ओरिएंटेड भी पूछते हैं क्वेश्चन, राइट. खासकर पोस्ट इंडिपेंडेंस के लिए करंट ओरिएंटेड भी पूछते हैं. सपोज दिस क्वेश्चन ऑल्सो, यू विल सी दैट दिस वाज ऑल्सो करंट ओरिएंटेड. इफ यू कैन सी, देयर वाज नेशनल दलित समिट इन हैदराबाद. So because of this national Dalit summit, you will see that this question, right, about Hyderabad Dalit movement, right, is natural. So they asked this question. So in this question, you will see that there was factionalism in, you can say, in Hyderabad. There was actually the factionalism between, right, the two group. One was the follower of Ambedkar, right, Dr. Ambedkar, and one was the follower of B.S. Venkat Rao. So there was two factions. Followers of Ambedkar and V.S. Venkat Rao. So one of the important limitation of the Dalit movement in India was that there were factionalism. है ना, एक important समस्या रहती है दलित मूवमेंट में कि फैक्शनलिज्म था, बहुत छोटे छोटे फैक्शंस बनते चले गए. राइट, इन हैदराबाद ऑल्सो यू विल सी दिस फैक्शन, राइट. सो लेकिन धीरे धीरे 1948 आते आते ये फैक्शनलिज्म ठीक हो गया एंड दलित movement, Dalit consciousness became more prominent in Hyderabad. हैदराबाद के दलित मूवमेंट को एक इम्पॉर्टेंट केस स्टडी माना जाता है. And you have to remember that V.S. Venkat Rao, he's so famous that he's called Ambedkar of, right, Hyderabad. So दो फैक्शन था, एक अंबेडकर के फॉलोअर्स का फैक्शन और वीएस वेंकट राव का फैक्शन. Actually they say that, right, the followers of Ambedkar, they formed scheduled caste federation, and they wanted to cooperate with the Congress. They were not actually with the Azad Hyderabad, right? But the second faction, they were actually suggesting what? Azad Hyderabad. They were against the integration of Hyderabad. So this kind of ideological difference was there. So Ambedkar and their followers were more nationalistic, right? वो ज़्यादा राष्ट्रीय थे और हैदराबाद को इंटीग्रेट करने के पक्षधर थे, राइट? वो चाहते नहीं थे कि हैदराबाद एक, राइट, अलग, राइट, स्टेट बने, राइट? लेकिन दूसरा फैक्शन चाहता था कि, राइट, आज़ाद हैदराबाद बने. So this kind of difference of opinion was there, factionalism was there, but gradually, right, they joined hand and, right, they played very important role in Dalit consciousness in Hyderabad. So this is, I think, that slightly complicated question. We don't have proper material also on that. लेकिन present context में they have, because I told you that there was National Dalit Summit, so therefore they asked this question. लेकिन ये question हम लोग थोड़ा सा, राइट, ट्रेंड के बाहर मानेंगे, राइट? दिस इज नॉट ए वेरी, राइट, ए गुड क्वेश्चन इन द कंटेक्स्ट ऑफ आवर सिलेबस, राइट? सो इस तरह का इंडिकेशन थोड़ा ठीक नहीं है. एनी हाउ, so you have modern India. I try to give you a brief idea about modern India. I did not give you the answer, but I try to give you some idea about modern India. Now coming to world history. Even world history section B and world history also, the first question is compulsory. They are asking 10 marks question, 5 question you have to write, and then you can say some normal question also. So even in world history also, the first compulsory question is difficult, right? So we will see that. Now see the question number 1 in world history. Next question. Now, the American War of Independence finally ended in 1783 when Britain acknowledged the independence of United States of America, right? So actually this question is related to the course of American War of Independence, right? So actually you have to write how the development course of American War of Independence. Of course, American War of Independence was because of the mercantile policy of the British, right? So there was policy of mercantilism, right? So and then American colonies reacted against the mercantile policy, right? They were against mercantilism, right? Mercantile policy of the British. And then after 7-year war, you will see that they became very strict. So after 1763, they started strictly implementing. They imposed many tax on the colonies, and the colonies suggested what? No taxation without representation. है ना? आप tax नहीं लगा सकते. And there was reaction, there was mobilization. As they were enlightened, they started reacting. So there was progress of this movement. Then you will see that there was 1765, right? Finally, you will see that, right, gradually in 1775, right, 1773 Boston Tea Party. Then 1775, you will see the real war started, war at Lexington and other places, war started. Finally, there was surrender in 1781, and finally there was Treaty of Paris in 1783, and they recognized. So mercantilism, 7-year war, then those taxes, either Stamp Act or Sugar Act or Quartering Act, and then there was Boston Tea Party, right? Then you will see after that This Boston Tea Party made the war inevitable, and then after that you have, right, actual war. And in this war, even the French and others also helped the American colonies. And finally, 1781, the British surrendered, and 83, there was recognition. So this is the broader idea, right, of the progress of this American War of Independence. This you can highlight. Right. So after 1775, 76, 77, this, right, you can easily highlight. Done. And 1783. Right. So in this question, you have to actually talk about the courses of the war. The American War of Independence finally ended, but after that also you will see the, right, the tussle continued, but, right, they recognized the independence of America. Right. Now, next question is the Chartist movement. The Chartist movement not only fulfilled some of the demands of the middle class, but its ramifications were first among the working class and the colonies as well. So you have to mention what is Chartist movement. What is Chartist movement? How it began in 1830s? What was the role of 1832 Act? Then what was the 6 demands? 6 demands, right? And when you see the 6 demands, if you can see, right, these 6 demand: a vote for every man, a ballot, right? See this 6 demand. 6 demand is a vote for every man, a ballot to protect the elector, no property qualification, payment to the member, equal constituency, annual parliament. These 6 demand, when you will see, so you will come to know that, right, that these 6 demand, and what was the result of this movement? Suppressed. Chartist movement was suppressed. Signature campaign, caused signature campaign, the violence, because of that it was suppressed. But what was the ramification? Ramification for working class. Ramification, right? It not only fulfilled. So you will have to write how it influenced middle class, how it influenced working class, how it influenced even the colonies. How it influenced colonies. So you have to write that how it influenced middle class, how it influenced working class, how it influenced colonies. Right. So what you are going to write? How it influenced middle class, working class and colonies. Working class, because labor reform started after that. Right. Middle class, right, because now you will see that, right, the democratic approach, parliamentary reforms. Colonies, why? Because demand of political rights, democratic rights. Right. So you have to remember that how Chartist movement not only fulfilled some of the demands of the middle class, but its ramifications were felt among the working class, and you will see, right, its ramifications were felt among the working class and the colonies as well. What was the ramification for colonies? Ramification for colony was democratic demand in colonies. What was the ramification for middle class? Awareness. Right. There was rise of socialism, working class, rise of socialism, trade union movement, labor reforms. So you have to talk about all this thing. Right. Then you will see the revolution of 1848, where shaped by the ideas of democracy and nationalism. Yes. So you must be knowing that there was European Revolution, European Revolution. There was 1830 Revolution. There was 1848 Revolution. And these revolutions, they represented what? Liberalism. These represent liberalism. And there was a force called, right, conservatism. There was a force called conservatism. Conservatism. So conservatism wanted to, you can say, stop this movement, stop this revolution. They suppressed this 1830 revolution. But in 1848 revolution, you will see that Metternich had to leave Austria. So revolution of 1848, you will see it was a victory. It was victory for democratic idea, nationalism idea. So you will have to write how this influenced, right, Austria, how this influenced France, how this influenced Italy and Germany. And there was unification of Italy and Germany. So there was demand of democratic rights, there was demand of nationalism because of 1848 revolution. Right, 1848 revolution. So 1848 revolution is representing what? Liberalism. There was democracy, idea of democracy, and there was idea of nationalism. Now there was a demand of voting rights. There was demand of voting rights. There was demand of nation. There was demand of nation. You will see in Italy and in Germany, right, those, right, they started, developing as a nation after 1848. Fine. So this revolution was representing what? Fall of that conservative force. And who represent the conservative force? Congress of Vienna. Who represent the Congress of conservative force? Right, Metternich. So this you have to write, that how revolution of 1848 were shaped by the ideas of democracy and nationalism. Right. Now the next, the British imperialism in South Africa from 1867 to 1902 was influenced to a large extent by the capitalist mining of diamond. So gold and diamond factor. Actually in South Africa, there was two players. One was Dutch, and then Dutch were expelled. There was Boer War, and then the British colonialism was there. So British colonialism in Africa, when you say that, I told you that there was Dutch control in South Africa, in the Cape Colony, then Transvaal. So you will see that there was control of Dutch colony. But gradually, when in late 1880s, diamond was discovered, gold was discovered, they became damn serious. They became serious. अब उनका मन था कि साउथ अफ्रीका में तो अब केवल मेरा होना चाहिए. Gold rush started. Right? So you will see that Dutch and British settlers colonized South Africa. Britain colonized South Africa between 1815 and 1910. इससे पहले कौन था? Dutch. There was clash between British colonists and the Dutch settlers called Boers. And when the gold was discovered and when the diamond was discovered, you have to write that how there was a tension. There was Anglo-Boer War 1899 to 1902. राइट तो ये गोल्ड और डायमंड ने सारा खेल बिगाड़ दिया, सारा खेल डचों का बिगाड़ दिया. एंड दे प्लेड इंपॉर्टेंट, यू कैन से, रोल इन कॉलोनाइजिंग. बट देयर वर अदर फैक्टर्स ऑल्सो. सो डायमंड एंड गोल्ड फैक्टर इज ओके. डायमंड एंड गोल्ड फैक्टर. सो डायमंड फैक्टर एंड गोल्ड फैक्टर है ना. साउथ अफ्रीका में ये दोनों फैक्टर इंपॉर्टेंट था. राइट, दे प्लेड इंपॉर्टेंट रोल, दे वर इंपॉर्टेंट. बट देयर वर अदर फैक्टर्स ऑल्सो. राइट, दे वांटेड स्ट्रेटेजिक, लोकेशन. दे वांटेड अदर रिसोर्सेस. राइट, they wanted, right, to end the role of their competitor, So imperialism was also one of the important factor, and of course capitalism was naturally a important factor. So both imperialism and colonialism, right, played important role in right, South Africa also, and in the other areas also. तो जरूर डायमंड एंड गोल्ड का तो रोल था, लेकिन हम लोग ये भी कहेंगे कि इसके अलावा भी कुछ इंपॉर्टेंट राइट फैक्टर्स थे. नेक्स्ट इज the supremacy of USA after the end of the Cold War had its challenges as well, right? So you will write that how there was supremacy of USA, how there was economic supremacy. So how supremacy, what kind of supremacy after, right, the end of Cold War, American supremacy after the end of Cold War, what kind of supremacy? You can write all those supremacy factor also, right? Lekin there was challenges also. There was, when there was a rise of European unification, so challenge, right? There was challenge also in this, right? Then there was a new challenge, the terrorism challenge was also there. So there was challenge, right? You will see that there was challenge also. It's not that there was no challenge. Supremacy of US of course was there. You have to write how supremacy, right, the cultural, the economic, the different organization you will have, you will see the supremacy, but it had this challenge also. Why challenge? I told you that rise of, right, Europe and unification of Europe, and then the new factor was the terror factor. Terror factor was also one of the important challenge. So you have to highlight the challenge also. The next part you will have to highlight challenges also in, right? So of course this question also was in the recent context. Then the philosophers and thinkers may have laid the foundation of the French Revolution, but it was precipitated by social and economic reason, right? So try to understand it, that this question is, of course, as you all know, you can easily understand it, that there was some problem in ancient regime in France. There was some problem in ancient regime. There was inequality, there was privilege, there was despotism, right? There was some problem in ancient regime. And who highlighted this problem? Who highlighted these problems? So who highlighted these problems? Philosophers. Philosophers highlighted this problem, like Rousseau, like Diderot, like Voltaire, right? So like Montesquieu, you can give example that they, philosophers and thinkers, they highlighted this problem, and when they highlighted this problem, they laid the foundation. They laid the foundation. They laid the foundation. But right, it was actually because of the, right, the economic reason, economic factor, right? You will see that the tax issue, right? The third state was not ready to pay the entire thing, and the first two states were not ready to share, and there was calling of the state general. And in state general there was a fight that no, one man one vote, right? So that kind of demand led to what? Fall of Bastille, and there was a revolution. So actually what precipitated the revolution was the economic idea. There was social inequality that precipitated, but who prepared the background, who prepared the foundation? It was philosophers. So this way French Revolution you can handle, right? So this question is also easy to handle. Then Marxian socialism claims itself to be a scientific socialist theory capable of explaining the history of humankind, right? So you have to write Marxian socialism, you have to write all the theory, Marxian socialism, right? You have to talk about, right, historical materialism, right? You have to talk about class struggle, right? You have to talk about alienation, you have to talk about surplus value. So you will see Marxian socialism, they presented it, in a proper manner, because before Marx there was utopian socialism. There was no proper presentation of how this classless society would be formed. But now there was a formula scientifically developed. So therefore, Marxian socialism is called scientific socialism. And how Marx explained his idea? He explained his idea through his principles. What kind of principles? So this kind of principle. So of course, they tried to explain the history of humankind through this, you can say, all these principles, and it claims itself to be a scientific formula, right? But there are some limitations also of all this, right? Suppose determinism, everything is determined by economy, historical determinism, है ना? अगर economy change तो सब कुछ change, right? So this kind of determinism, and then you will see that their whatever they recommended never happened. Capitalism also changed and survived. So there are many limitations, but still it is considered as a scientific formula. Then next question is, enlightenment was not confined to scientific revolution alone, but humanism and ideas of progress too were the inseparable constituents. Yes, so you will write that how, right, enlightenment had many constituents. So is actually they are asking about the different constituents of enlightenment. Constituents of enlightenment, right? Constituents of enlightenment, right? So you must be knowing that how it is considered as the last stage of Renaissance, enlightenment. And of course, because of enlightenment there was scientific progress. Enlightenment talked about experimentation, observation, so therefore there was scientific revolution. But enlightenment is not confined to scientific revolution, it is not confined to progress in science, progress in technology. It also talked about discovery of man, humanism. It also talked about, right, the welfare approach. It also talked about reform in law. It also talked about reform in economy, right? So enlightenment was actually a movement. Like the Renaissance was a mental revolution, and the final, the culmination of Renaissance was this enlightenment. Enlightenment is rationality, questioning, and solution, giving the solution, not only questioning. So you have to write that how it was not confined to scientific revolution, and it also talked about humanism and idea of progress, right? So this way you can talk about enlightenment. Then the impact of industrial revolution on the middle class worldview is reflected in the views of Adam Smith, Thomas Malthus, and Jeremy Bentham. See, industrial revolution had economic impact, social impact. So actually इस क्वेश्चन में हमें लिखना है कि इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन का आइडियोलॉजिकल क्या इम्पैक्ट था. आइडियोलॉजिकल impact of industrial revolution. आइडियोलॉजिकल इम्पैक्ट ऑफ इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन. क्या क्या आइडियोलॉजिकल इम्पैक्ट हुआ, क्या क्या इम्पैक्ट हुआ? फ्री ट्रेड, एडम स्मिथ, राइट, एडम स्मिथ का व्यू, फ्री ट्रेड, राइट. थॉमस माल्थस, पॉपुलेशन बेस्ड व्यूज. देन जर्मी बेंथम, यूटिलिटेरियन अप्रोच. So you have to write that the impact of industrial revolution, right, on the middle class is reflected in the views of Adam Smith, Thomas Malthus, and Jeremy Bentham. Fine, but you will see that one of the impact was also rise of socialism. right? Even the working class came under the influence of socialism after the Industrial Revolution. So they started questioning this approach, right? So you have to comment. Then 1748 to 1870, you will see the different stages of Italian unification. Actually, Italy was a geographical expression. Italy was a geographical expression. You can see before unification, Italy was divided into different states. You can see there was Kingdom of Sardinia and Piedmont. There was Kingdom of Lombardy and Venetia. Here Austria dominated. Then there was the Central Kingdom, Papal State dominated. Then the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. So unification, before unification, Italy was, right, you know what? Italy was, right, dominated by some foreign, you can say, countries, mainly Austria, right, France, done. So how the unification of Italy? So how the unification of Italy, different stages. You will write what was the role of Napoleon, what was the role of Napoleon, then what was the role of, right, different stages you will write. How role of, after role of Napoleon, you will write role of, you can say, Carbonari movement, role of 1830 revolution, role of Mazzini, then role of 1848 revolution, role of Cavour का क्या रोल था, different phases. Cavour का role, very important role, Cavour. And here you will see the role of Crimean War. Then after role of Cavour, you will see role of Garibaldi. Then after Garibaldi, you will see role of Victor Emmanuel II, the ruler of Sardinia, Piedmont, Victor Emmanuel II. Then role of Sedova, role of Sedan. So finally in 1870, there was role of these two wars, Sedova and Sedan, and finally Italy was unified. So different stages. So different historians talked about different stages of Italian unification, right? So you can use map also in this question, right? Map also you can use in this question. Now coming to Treaty of Versailles, right, contained itself the seeds of the Second World War. Examine. Actually, Treaty of Versailles had some provisions. Treaty of Versailles had some provisions, right? It contained, you can say, the economic provisions, the territorial losses, the military provisions, war guilt. Treaty of Versailles was a forced peace. ट्रीटी ऑफ वर्साई में जर्मनी को घेर लिया गया था, जर्मनी को टेरिटोरियल लॉस हुआ था, उसे फ्रांस को देना पड़ा था, राइट? यू कैन सी जर्मनी had to, you can say, give Alsace-Lorraine, Saar Valley to France. Germany had to give Eupen and Malmedy to Belgium. Germany had to give North Schleswig to Denmark. Germany had to make this Danzig port a free city. Germany had to develop a police corridor. So जर्मनी को टेरिटोरियल लॉस हुआ था, जर्मनी का इकोनॉमिक लॉस हुआ था, जर्मनी को डीमिलिटराइज कर दिया गया था कुछ एरिया को, सपोज राइनलैंड. तो जर्मनी को वॉर गिल्ट एक्सेप्ट करना पड़ा था. तो इकोनॉमिकली, साइकोलॉजिकली, पॉलिटिकली, राइट, जर्मनी को एकदम दबा दिया गया था. सो ऑफ कोर्स यू विल सी दैट दिस ट्रीटी, the Treaty of Versailles was a harsh treaty, and therefore, and it was an insult to a nation, and therefore it contained the seeds of the Second World War. लेकिन हमें यह भी बताना है कि after 1919 how there was, you can say, a soft treatment. You will see during the Weimar Republic period there was soft treatment. जर्मनी में इन्वेस्टमेंट किया गया, यंग प्लान, डाउस प्लान. जर्मनी का फ्रांस के साथ रिलेशन इंप्रूव भी हुआ. तो ऐसा नहीं कह सकते हैं कि हार्श ट्रीटी ऑफ वर्साई वाज ओनली रिस्पॉन्सिबल. यू विल सी द न्यू अप्रोच अंडर द Weimar Republic. But overall, how Hitler used it, how Hitler used this harsh treaty, right? And this led to what? Second World War. So World War, of course, हार्सनेस धीरे धीरे खत्म हो गई थी, नो डाउट अबाउट इट, लेकिन फिर भी हिटलर ने उसको अपमान को highlight kiya, and therefore you will see that it contained the seeds of Second World War. As the question is examined, you don't have to only explain that yes it contained the seeds of Second World War. हमें ये बताना है कि राइट कैसे ट्रीटी ऑफ वर्साई के जो प्रोविजंस थे, जो हार्श प्रोविजंस थे, उनको वीमर रिपब्लिक के टाइम में धीरे धीरे डाइल्यूट कर दिया गया था. आई होप यू नो दिस. फाइन. नाउ द नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन इज that UNO was the necessity of the time when the World War ended. So you have to introduce what is UNO when it was established. You have to introduce how necessity of the time, है ना, उस समय जो स्थिति थी, जो डर था वॉर का, जो रिकंस्ट्रक्शन की जरूरत थी, पीस की जरूरत थी, डीकोलोनाइजेशन की जरूरत थी, है ना, तो उस समय में यूएन का रोल बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट था. इट वाज अ नीड ऑफ द टाइम एंड देयर वाज मैनी कॉन्फ्रेंस, याल्टा कॉन्फ्रेंस से लेके, राइट, यू हैव मैनी कॉन्फ्रेंसेस व्हिच फाइनली कल्मिनेटेड इनटू, राइट, यू नो, द फॉर्मेशन ऑफ यूएन 1945. सो इट वाज हाउ नेसेसिटी ऑफ द टाइम. देन यू विल राइट व्हाट वाज द अचीवमेंट, इसका अचीवमेंट क्या था. देन फाइनली अचीवमेंट वाज देयर, नो डाउट अबाउट इट, इन द पीस कीपिंग, in human rights, and then you have the shortcomings and the present, you know, situation also. You can see what kind of role they are playing in the struggle between Hamas and Israel, and in that struggle between Ukraine and Russia. You can see how ineffective is UN. So this is shortcoming. So you can write about the necessity of the time, you can write about the achievements, you can write about the shortcomings, how it failed to prevent the genocide, how it's represented, you can say representation is outdated, है ना, कब का representation they are carrying, they are not actually reforming the UN Security Council. Reformation, right, reform in the Security Council is required. So how Western countries are dominating, so these are the shortcomings, how they lack funds, separate force, so all these shortcomings, so that you can also mention. So 3 part you have to highlight. Then you will see the historical causes for the rise of anti-colonial movement in Southeast Asia. Actually, you have to write about Southeast Asia. You have to write about mainly, right, the Cambodia, Laos, but mainly you have to write about the Vietnam issue. How Vietnam issue actually is important in the Southeast Asia, how there was a rise of anti-colonial movement. I hope you know this, that in Vietnam there was French control, right? When you can see in Vietnam you have Japanese colonialism, then you have the American colonialism, yes or no? So Vietnam faced French colonialism, Japanese colonialism, you will see the American colonialism, and gradually there was rise of, you can say, consciousness. And of course you have to write how Ho Chi Minh or Viet Cong, right, you know, they played important role. So of course the cultural differences, spread of Western education, emergence of communist ideas, so you can highlight, right, how all this played important role. So in the context of Vietnam you can highlight this. Then Arab nationalism was not only the cultural movement but also an anti-colonial movement. So Arab nationalism, you can mention that how cultural movement, how there was enlightenment, promotion of Arab language, role of Arab writers, and then how it actually became, Arab League was formed after Second World War, right? And then in 1950s also, when Colonel Nasir led the movement of Arab nationalism, so Arab nationalism was against, right, you know, some colonial power, right? So now you have to write how it was an anti-colonial struggle. Of course it was a cultural movement, but it was against Ottoman Empire, it was against the Sykes-Picot Agreement, it was against the Balfour Declaration of 1917, how it was against the Zionist colonization, so-called Zionist colonization. So Arab nationalism was not only a cultural movement, it was also an anti-colonial struggle, right? So Arab nationalism is still continuing, right? So that dream of Arab nation, Arab nationalism is still continuing, and sometime, right, you will see that some violent approach of this Arab nationalism. They fought many war against Israel, right? So how cultural movement and how it was anti-colonial, right? Movement you have to write, and then this is right. The explanation of paper two, right? I just wanted to give you some idea of paper two. I hope right, you have some clue, and as a fresher you should not worry about some statement. You should not think that this statement is not available in some popular books. If you have some basic point with you, if you have some understanding, you can easily get, right, sufficient number of question to write, right? You don't have to attempt all. Try to understand it. कोई एक क्वेश्चन को देख के जो कॉम्प्लिकेटेड है अपनी राय नहीं बनानी चाहिए कि अरे इस एरिया से बहुत डिफ़िकल्ट क्वेश्चन आता है, ऐसा नहीं है। हमारे पास डिफ़िकल्ट क्वेश्चन भी होता है, लेकिन ऐसे क्वेश्चंस भी हमें मिल जाते हैं अगर हम पूरे सिलेबस पर काम करते हैं। ऐसे क्वेश्चंस हमें मिल जाते हैं जो जिसको हम यूज़ कर सकते हैं, हम राइट सफिशिएंट हमारे पास क्वेश्चन मिल जाता है जिसको हम लिख सकते हैं। फाइन। सो आइडिया इज़ टू प्रिपेयर द इंटायर सिलेबस, है ना। अब वो फेज़ नहीं रहा कि हम चूज़ कर सकते हैं कि हम ये चैप्टर नहीं करेंगे, हम वो चैप्टर नहीं करेंगे। हमारे सिलेबस में लिखे हुए जितने भी टॉपिक्स हैं, हम अगर सब पर काम करते हैं, है कि नहीं, तो हम सफिशिएंट नंबर ऑफ क्वेश्चन हमें मिल जाता है लिखने के लिए। कुछ क्वेश्चंस ज़रूर टिपिकल होंगे, सपोज पोस्ट इंडिपेंडेंस से कुछ क्वेश्चन जैसे था, सपोज कुछ वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री का क्वेश्चन, राइट। तो कुछ क्वेश्चन ज़रूर होंगे जो कुछ टिपिकल होंगे, लेकिन अगर आपने सिलेबस के सारे एस्पेक्ट पर काम किया है तो यू विल डेफिनेटली राइट गेट क्वेश्चन, राइट। सो आपको चिंता करने की बिल्कुल ज़रूरत नहीं है, राइट। आशा करता हूँ कि आपको कुछ बेनिफिट मिला होगा। सो थैंक यू एंड ऑल द बेस्ट।